The ivory chess pieces gleamed under the crystal chandelier, like tiny monuments to wealth. But Margaret Chen barely noticed them anymore. At 73, the billionaire tech mogul had played thousands of games in this very study, defeating CEOs, politicians, and even a former world champion. Yet lately, each victory felt hollow. Each checkmate as meaningless as the zeros in her bank account. She'd built an empire, yes, but sat alone in a mansion so vast that her footsteps echoed through marble hallways, like ghosts of a life never truly lived. On this particular Thursday afternoon, as rain drummed against floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay, Margaret found herself watching not the board, but the slight figure dusting her bookshelves, Elena Rodriguez, her housekeeper, moving with quiet dignity that money could never buy. Margaret had intended to ignore the presence of Elena's daughter that day. When her housekeeper apologetically explained that her usual childcare had fallen through, Margaret had waved dismissively, granting permission for the girl to wait in the kitchen. But curiosity, that old companion that had driven her through decades of business deals, drew her downstairs during her afternoon break. She found the child, perhaps 9 years old, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, a battered book spread before her. "What are you reading?" Margaret asked, her voice sharper than intended from years of boardroom negotiations. The girl looked up, dark eyes intelligent and unafraid. "Chess tactics, ma'am. It's from the library." Something flickered in Margaret's chest, surprise perhaps or recognition. "You play chess?" "I try to," the girl said simply. "I'm Sophia. My mom talks about you sometimes." Margaret studied the child more carefully now. Sophia's clothes were clean but worn, her sneakers held together with careful stitching. Yet she carried herself with a quiet confidence that reminded Margaret of someone, herself, perhaps 50 years ago, before the money, before the loneliness wrapped around her like expensive silk. "Would you like to see a real chess set?" The words escaped before Margaret's rational mind could intervene. Sophia's face transformed, uncertainty giving way to wonder. "Really?" 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in Margaret's study, the antique Staunton chess set between them. Margaret had expected to offer a brief lesson, perhaps humor the child for 15 minutes before returning to her scheduled conference call. Instead, she found herself leaning forward, genuinely engaged for the first time in months. "You move the bishop diagonally," Margaret explained, demonstrating, "and the knight in an L shape." "I know," Sophia said softly. "I've been studying for 2 years. The library has books, and sometimes I watch videos on the computer at school." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Then let's play a game." She expected to win in 10 moves, maybe 15 if she held back. Sophia responded with the Sicilian defense. Margaret blinked. The Sicilian was aggressive, complex, favored by masters who understood its intricate variations. She'd seen CEOs crumble against it. Surely the child had memorized the opening without understanding its deeper implications. Margaret pressed forward, developing her pieces, probing for weaknesses. Sophia's response was devastatingly precise. She didn't just know the moves, she understood them, each piece coordinating in a symphony of tactical awareness that made Margaret's pulse quicken. The girl's small fingers hovered over pieces with careful deliberation, and Margaret recognized that gesture. It was the mark of someone who played entire games in their mind, who saw not just the board before them, but the ghost boards of possibilities branching into the future. 30 moves in, Margaret realized she was fighting for her life. Not literally, of course, but in the way that mattered to someone who'd built her identity on being the smartest person in any room. Sophia had sacrificed a knight, a real sacrifice, not a blunder, opening lines of attack that Margaret hadn't seen coming. The girl's queen and rook coordinated with lethal efficiency, and Margaret's king suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable despite the fortress of pawns she'd constructed. "Where did you learn this?" Margaret asked, her voice betraying her astonishment. Sophia didn't look up from the board. "Books, mostly. And Mr. Patterson, he's a custodian at my school. He used to play in tournaments before his wife got sick. He teaches me during lunch sometimes when he has time." Margaret felt something crack inside her chest, some calcified layer around her heart. Here was a child with more raw talent than players she'd paid thousands of dollars to train with. learning from library books and a kind janitor's lunch breaks. While Margaret surrounded herself with every advantage money could buy, this girl had cultivated genius in the margins of a life where survival itself required strategy. The game continued in focused silence, broken only by the soft click of pieces on wood and the rain's persistent rhythm. Margaret deployed every trick she'd learned in 50 years of competitive play. She feinted, she created tactical puzzles, she tried to force Sophia into time pressure by playing quickly. But the girl met each challenge with a composure that seemed impossible for her age, her brow furrowed in concentration that reminded Margaret of photographs of Bobby Fischer, of Judith Polgar, of champions who'd seen patterns invisible to ordinary minds. On move 47, Margaret saw the checkmate coming 3 moves away. She could have resigned. That's what serious players did when the outcome became inevitable. But something made her play it out, made her want to see how Sophia would finish, whether the girl would spot the elegant conclusion or settle for something more pedestrian. Sophia found the elegant path. For a long moment, Margaret stared at the board, at the inescapable trap she'd walked into despite her best efforts. Then she began to laugh, not the polite chuckle she deployed at charity galas, but a genuine surprised laugh that came from somewhere deep inside, from a place she'd thought had withered years ago. "That was brilliant," Margaret said, meeting Sophia's uncertain gaze. "Truly brilliant. How often do you get to play?" Sophia's expression shifted, enthusiasm dimming. "Not much. There's a chess club at school, but it meets after hours and Mom works until 6. The chess set there is missing pieces anyway. Mostly I just study and play against myself." Margaret stood, walking to the window, where rain blurred the city lights below into impressionist smears of gold and white. She thought of her vast home, her empty calendar, her endless resources deployed toward nothing that mattered. She thought of Sophia, playing both sides of games against herself, nurturing extraordinary talent in solitude. "What if you came here?" Margaret said, turning back. "Twice a week, maybe 3 times. After school. Your mother's already here, and we could play, study together. I know grandmasters. People who could teach you things I can't. I could—" She paused, surprised by the emotion in her voice. "I would like to help if you'd let me." Sophia's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring across her features. "Really? You'd want to play with me again?" "Want to?" Margaret crossed back to the table, beginning to reset the pieces. "Sophia, I haven't enjoyed a chess game this much in 20 years. You have a gift, a real gift, and gifts like that deserve to be developed. More than that." She paused, searching for words that had never come easily. "I've spent my life acquiring things, building things, but I've forgotten what it feels like to actually connect with another human being over something that matters. You reminded me. So yes, I really want to." In the months that followed, Margaret's study became a different kind of boardroom, one where the victories meant something beyond quarterly profits. Sophia arrived 3 afternoons a week, and Margaret arranged for a former U.S. champion to join them on Saturdays. She watched with fierce pride as Sophia's rating climbed, as tournament directors began whispering about the young Prodigy from San Francisco. But more than that, Margaret discovered that teaching someone was nothing like defeating someone. Every principle she explained, every tactical pattern she helped Sophia master, created a connection that all her billions had never purchased. Sophia asked about Margaret's life, her company, her journey from a struggling immigrant family to the Forbes list. And Margaret found herself asking, too, about Sophia's school, her dreams, the books she loved beyond chess manuals. Elena watched these transformations with quiet tears and grateful smiles. Margaret insisted on paying for Sophia's tournament entries, her coaching, eventually her travel to national competitions. But she was careful never to make it feel like charity, always framing it as an investment in talent, as the kind of thing anyone would do for someone with Sophia's potential. 2 years later, Sophia won the National Junior Championship. Margaret sat in the audience, her heart pounding with anxiety she'd never felt. During her own business negotiations, and when Sophia's final move secured victory, Margaret stood and cheered with uncharacteristic abandon. Afterward, as cameras flashed and Sophia held her trophy aloft, the girl found Margaret in the crowd and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." But Margaret knew the truth. The gratitude flowed both ways. Sophia had given her something no amount of money could buy, a reminder that humanity's greatest treasures weren't acquisitions but connections, not victories but the relationships forged in their pursuit. In teaching Sophia chess, Margaret had rediscovered what it meant to be human, to invest not in markets but in people, to measure success not in dollars but in the light of a child's growing confidence and joy. That evening, as Margaret reset the pieces for another game, she realized her mansion no longer echoed with loneliness. It hummed with possibility, with purpose, with the quiet sound of two minds meeting across 64 squares, proving that the most meaningful checkmates happen not on the board, but in the human heart.